In today's video, we are going to be ranking the most elite ships in Azur Lane. Purple ships used to be a valuable rarity in Azur Lane, but with every event bringing us more and more powerful SR ships, followed by the newer introduction of UR ships, elite ships have kind of fallen out of favor with usage. So today we're going to specifically look at only elite ships. Ships that despite their rarity are powerful, and if they were ever to get upgraded to a higher rarity, would be something to reckon with. This video idea was actually suggested by one of my channel members. My channel members are a great support, not just from the financial aspect, but also from helping with new ideas like this and adding feedback to the content that I create. Many of them have been around supporting me for many years now. So with that, let's get into some of the ground rules here. If you watch my channel enough, you're probably familiar with the fact that when I rate ships, I typically look at them completely maxed out. The highest level, the highest skills, the highest affinity, all the augment modules if need be, and of course, a retrofit if available. Retrofits, of course, change the rarity of the ship. So for this video, we are going to be considering a ship's rarity based on the post-retrofit rarity if it has one. Thus, if it started out elite but became an SR with a retrofit, it is not eligible for this video. However, if it started as a rare, but then it got retrofitted into an elite, it is eligible to be in the rankings in this video. This, of course, can change over time. One of the ships in this video that I mentioned might get a retrofit in the future, but we have to draw the line somewhere when we're talking about just elites, and that's where I'm going to draw it. Also, I'm only going to be talking about the top 10 elite ships in this video. I could talk all day about more ships, but I'm trying to make this video not excessively long. There are a lot of dud elite ships, and the nuances between which ones are better or not don't really matter because they're just never used ever, and the circumstances that differentiates them are negligible a lot of the time. So before we get into the top 10, I'm going to name a bunch of honorable mentions that are not going to be in this video. First things first is base elite ships that are powerful in their own right, but because of their SR retrofit are not eligible. This includes all the starter ships, Unicorn, Pinghai and Ninghai, Jinsu, Saratoga, Hiru, Helena, Independence, Paimat Mercuria, Kasumi, Yatsen, Charles Osborne, Ark Royal, and all the Chinese missile destroyers. There are actually technically only 3 of them. The 4th one, Fushan, is not a retrofit yet, so she technically is eligible for this video. However, I'd be shocked if she doesn't get one in the near future. Additionally, we're not going to talk about submarines. It feels like a completely different category in the game, and honestly, they are optional. It is optional content to have submarines most of the time. And the way that the submarine mechanics work also doesn't lend itself well to elite ships because it really focuses on you get to a certain oxygen level and then it's just the highest torpedo stat. And that typically lends itself to higher rarity, better submarine. Kind of boring. Also, depending on the server that you're in, and I guess how you count elite ships, there's approximately 300 different elite ships in the game. I really don't want to waste one of my top 10 slots on a submarine. To get you guys off my back, I'll give you an honorable mention for the best elite submarine in my opinion, being Nautilus. She has enough oxygen that you can double equip torpedo auxiliaries, and she's got a unique skill that allows her to surface and give debuffs. So as far as elite submarines go, I think she's the best one. Alright, no more talk about submarines. Alright, I know it sounds like I'm disqualifying a lot of ships before we even get started, but I have one more honorable mention before we get into the top 10 list. This next ship I have to put on here because otherwise she's going to kind of win by a technicality, and that ship is Hoshao. Now, she is one of the worst ships that you could bring into a battle. However, she is a very convenient skill that increases the battle experience of your carriers and light carriers by 15%, so she's going to save you a ton of grind time. So of course you use her a lot. I use her a lot to save me a lot of time. You're going to put her in a bunch of fleets because, you know, grinding is part of this game and you want to level up those ships faster, so she saves you a lot of time, but that's not really the goal here. The technique, it feels like it's like a Bullen. You're like, oh, I need Bullens, but that's not like a good ship I'm ever going to use. Hoshao is like technically using her to get the experience buff all the time, but not particularly a good ship. So we're going to call her an honorable mention here. All right, I blabbed for 5 minutes. It's time to get in the top 10 rankings of elite ships. If you don't agree with my rankings, put your own rankings down in the comments. Number 10, we're going to start with Queen Elizabeth. Now, this was a hard choice for number 10 because a lot of the elite ships that are going to be on this ranking list are going to be in the Vanguard, and I was trying to get some main fleet ships to go here, it's very difficult to get a main fleet ship because the Vanguard is more suited to giving up some of the stats for support ships and kind of niche roles, whereas the main fleet really needs to focus on getting those damage numbers high, and elite ships tend not to do that. So I was a little bit torn here. There were a couple runner-ups like Huga, Gangut, Angus, but I decided to go with Queen Elizabeth because I think it's absolutely ridiculous that this ship does not have a retrofit or anything, not even an augment module. Like, this ship is one of the oldest ships in the game, like the first faction leader in the game, and they have not touched her like ever or buffed her at all. She needs a lot of help, but I mean, her skill is amazing. Increase basically all the stats you can think of except speed by 15% for your British ships. Very powerful. Obviously, she's got a ton of help that she needs everywhere else. She's got terrible stats, and she just has, she has nothing. No barrages, just very old. She does have Dido. She can get buffed by Dido, so there is technically synergy there. And if you're going to use her, make sure it's like 6 British ships to totally maximize that skill. But I also think she deserves to be in the top 10 because if she ever does get a retrofit that kind of fixes some of the damage that she deals and doesn't make it such a detriment to carry her around, then, you know, she could be pretty good because that Queen's Order skill is actually very solid, and I would like to see that. I've been wanting that for a while, and I don't even like British ships that much. I think that she deserves the 10 spot. I think a lot of the other ships there maybe technically are a little bit better in terms of their raw power, but this ship has a lot of potential based on the skills, or shall I just say skill. All right, number 9, we have the light cruiser Leipzig. While Queen Elizabeth has basically got nothing since she is released, Dido doesn't count. Leipzig, on the other hand, has gotten everything. She's got augment modules, she's got a retrofit, she has been upgraded a lot. Her base version gives boosts to all cruisers, light cruisers and heavy cruisers, which is nice, especially in the KMS faction, but it's not locked to just KMS, so keep that in mind. Part of the reason she's good. But when she gets her augment module, she's going to get extra stats that are going to be nice, and then she's going to get a barrage, like a good barrage that kind of is reminiscent of the new power creep that we have here. So very good skill here. And then her retrofit skill is like fantastic for survivability. It increases the speed of all your Vanguard fleet, which is great. So it doesn't matter again. Once again, she's not locked to any sort of faction, and so it just gives speed. And then it reduces ramming damage 25%. That's not great, but it is fine. And then she goes basically invincible. So when she drops below a certain amount of health, she goes invincible for 5 seconds, and then she increases her damage dealt for the rest of the battle. Those are all really good solid skills. Nothing is locked to her, and really, like, this ship with extra stats would be kind of busted. She actually doesn't have too bad stats after retrofit. I mean, it's still, you know, she started off as a rare ship, keep that in mind, but yeah, I would say she is a very powerful elite ship. She stays at number 9 partially because she's already had all the upgrades that she's probably ever going to be able to get. She's got her augment module, she's got her retrofit. Yeah, but this is definitely like a really solid ship, and they've done good work in keeping her in with the times. Number 8 is going to be another light cruiser, this one being the USS Birmingham. She's a Cleveland class light cruiser, and that's a pretty good class, honestly, for elite ships, especially when the game first started off. They got pretty decent, solid stats for that, and so she's going to be compared to a lot of her sisters, but I think she's got the pair of really good skills, and she has some synergy that's not even coming from herself. She also, like Queen Elizabeth, has not been upgraded at all. She has no augment module, no retrofit, etc. So she has the potential to be enhanced in the future. While her first skill is not very good, it's just kind of when planes are shot down, she increases her firepower and anti-air stat, as well as reduce a little bit of burning. Her second skill is actually pretty good. Upon she takes damage, she can increase her own evasion by up to 40% for 5 seconds. That's really nice. It's like a mini Eldritch skill. And then once per battle, when she falls below 30%, she goes invincible again. Notice that 2 of the 3 ships that we've shown so far go invincible. That's something that's really important for these elite ships that really just don't have a ton of stats to survive long enough. Now, Birmingham, ironically, has decent stats. She's part of the Cleveland class, and they're one of the better classes that are elite rarities. But nonetheless, going invincible is really good, especially in the Vanguard. Additionally, Birmingham actually has a good pairing with Independence. Independence has a skill that buffs both of them when they're together, and Independence is a very good ship that you use frequently, so that's another good pairing that allows allows her to be there. But Birmingham by herself is also pretty solid. She's also equal union, so it gives her options to some good equipment. Next up for number 7, we have USS Portland. She is the first heavy cruiser on this list. I was debating on letting her be on this list because actually partially the reason that she's on this list is because she has good stats for what she is. She has a retrofit, so she is elite, but even for that, she has pretty solid defense stats. And this makes her a very usable ship. Even to this day, newer players probably are using Portland to kind of buff their vanguards until they collect more powerful ships, and I think that was worthy of mentioning here as a very powerful elite ship. Now, she does have good skills as well, specifically defense order, really, and that is a 25% chance to decrease your entire fleet's damage taken by 15%. That is a lot of damage that you can reduce if that is proccing. Of course, there's a lot of RNG there, and that is a problem with a lot of elite ships, is a lot of their skills are actually really powerful, but they're also locked behind these low percentage triggers. Portland, though, is pretty solid with her stats, and so early game, you can definitely make up for that, and I use Portland a lot, and even now, like, you can use her to clear a lot of content because she is pretty powerful. Let's not forget she also has a main gun +1, and that's good for damage. Ships as old as Portland typically didn't have this as much, and she's just an impressive all-around ship from the defensive to the offensive, and she's very easily obtainable, and I just had to put her in the list. There were a couple ships that were much more PvP niche that I decided to bump out of the top 10 in order to play Portland just because of how frequent and versatile she is. Speaking of PvP, in the number 6 slot, we finally have an entry that is PvP related, at least somewhat, and that is the IJN destroyer Naganami. It's kind of hard to look at this ship and remember how dominant of a torpedo ship that this was. We've come so far in torpedo damage. Torpedo damage is some of the highest power creep in the game. I mean, Unzen and Shimikaze are on a whole nother level at the UR level, but elite ships back in the day could actually hold their own because torpedoes were something that they could do well with. Being an IJN destroyer, she had decent torpedo stats and efficiencies, but what stood her above the rest was actually her kind of acting like a double preloaded destroyer. While she's not actually a double preloaded torpedo ship, that was Ibuki, she acts like it, and she is notably a destroyer. A lot more ships can buff destroyers, specifically like Jinsu, than something like a heavy cruiser Ibuki, especially in the past, and her skill allows her to basically fire an extra set of torpedoes 10 seconds after the battle. This was really good in PvP because it really allowed her to get 2 sets of torpedoes off really fast. She has a preloaded, then she has one from her skill at the 10-second mark, and then by the time she hits the 20-second mark, she'll have a third launch of torpedoes. And with how squishy she is, that was enough. Just to get those 3 torps off, she did a lot of damage, especially if you buff them with crits, and that is where she was relevant. And you could actually use that for bosses too. That was totally relevant, so she actually has a lot of potential there, and she also is buffing other people too, so that's a very key part, is if you're focusing on all the torpedoes and you're running like Jinsu and maybe Noshiru or Ainami or something like that, or Yudachi, you can actually buff them with, you know, her other skill that allows you to increase the torpedo stat and crit rate of your destroyers and light cruisers. Obviously Ibuki was kind of not there, and it also increases evasion, so solid skills here. She gets basically a very early version of the, you know, double preloaded, or kind of like Harbin also gets this, like, she gets to fire torpedoes twice. Now, Naganami kind of struggles in the later batches because she doesn't have a lot of survivability. Additionally, her skill does proc guaranteed at the 10-second mark, but then every 20 seconds after that, it's only a 25% chance, which is really low, unfortunately. And yeah, she's just, you know, torpedo damage has just kind of skyrocketed through the roof. So what used to be great damage from Naganami now pales in comparison to the newest UR ships. But this was a very interesting ship and definitely saw a ton of play in PvP, and you could use it to boss still in a lot of content because of the way it's set up. Moving on to number 5, we have another IJN destroyer, and that is Kaguru. And honestly, Kaguru and Naganami are right next to each other. They basically do kind of the same thing and very similarly, but they do it in a way that, you know, makes one better than the other for different types of content. So Naganami was very much better for PvP because she focused a lot of that damage early on. Kaguru Kaguru, though, is a little bit more focused on RNG damage that is more effective in these sort of boss fights, these reach fights. She has the ability, most notably, to launch a second wave of torpedoes. Unfortunately, it has a 10-second cooldown, so you can't infinitely loop it like Ranger. That would be so cool. But she also has a retrofit and an augment module that gives her 2 other cool skills. Interference is good enough. I mean, it's kind of adds some survivability to the fleet, but more importantly, she gets from her augment module the torpedo command, which allows her to buff the whole Vanguard's torpedo stat, as well as buff her torpedo stat and crit on top of that. That's like a 30% torpedo stat boost. She's already got a pretty good torpedo stat after that retrofit as well. And yeah, so she's really much like kind of RNG doubling those torps, and frankly, she actually sees a lot of use in like speed runs, especially depending on the format. I remember when we were doing speed run competitions, and typically people would get to ban, so you would draft the ships you want to do, and then you could ban ships that other people couldn't use, and it was pretty frequent to pick some of the top tier like Ainami or something like that and ban them, because that was like really at the back in the day, it was like really easy to just like one-shot torps here. And so like Kaguru was very much a high pick because most people didn't choose to ban her in those speedrun competitions, but she was good enough if you could get her to proc, and depending on the rules set up, if you had multiple tries, then it was totally worth it because you could get some really impressive times with this elite ship. So anyway, she gets in the number 5 slot, so you can't call me biased for PvP because I literally gave the bossing PvE content ship that is pretty much a wash with Naganami the higher slot here. Okay, so let's move on to number 4. Number 4 is Isuzu, and we finally broke the streak where we went no retrofit, retrofit, no retrofit, retrofit, and we finally have back-to-back retrofits, and that is Isuzu. Isuzu's a really interesting ship because she was pretty much awful, terrible, not a good ship until she got her retrofit. Isuzu is probably most notoriously known for her +1 anti-air gun. This was one of the first ships to do it, and obviously more ships have done it now, and you see like Cheshire and things like that, but this ship definitely kind of started that trend where she has 2 anti-air guns, so that's kind of crazy. Anti-air is not necessarily a stat that you want all the time, but when you need it, and she can shoot down planes. Now, she was very, very, very weak in her base form, and even though she had anti-air mode, which is not even that good of a skill, it's actually kind of bad, but when she got her retrofit, she got like an extra 50 anti-air stat, which makes a difference, and then she got her other skill, which basically allows her to, based on the gun you equip, turn on and off different skills with the main gun efficiencies and the anti-air gun efficiencies, and it's really cool. She's a really cool ship, but in general, this ship is basically got one of the highest sets of an anti-air gun +1 and the high anti-air post retrofit, and the high efficiency gives her some of the best damage against planes. Now, you know, some of these newer URs like Guam and things like that have like kind of gotten in her way, but she is a very old OG ship that's been around as a drop ship for I think since like the base game. She's like drops in like chapter 7. So yes, anyway, she's very good and post retrofit for shooting down planes. I've actually used her especially in fleets that I want to run IJN only. That's very important because typically IJN struggles with anti-air, and Isuzu can just solve that problem, which I think is why I put her as high as she did. If she was like in the USS faction where you have so many other anti-air ships that are good, maybe she gets lost behind some of, you know, the competition, but the fact that she sits in IJN I think can be really important because that faction does struggle with anti-air a lot. Anyway, she also has like one of the most interesting transformations from her base art to her retrofit art. Like she feels like she like grew up a ton. But anyway, Isuzu's great. You know, obviously going to use her for anti-air. All right, we're going to move into the top 3. We're finally there. There's 3 left. Let's see who the top 3 are. Number 3 is going to be Stefan Potter. Now, this one is interesting because honestly, the air raid assistant skill is so freaking broken. When you need it, you need it. There is no better skill when you're running triple carriers. So if you're going to be doing that on occasion, you're going to need to have one of these ships around to use. Now, a lot of ships actually have this skill. Kazugumo is definitely one that's used a lot. She's an SR, but there's a lot of elite ships too. So why do we pick Stefan Potter over, say, Ardent or Ariake, who have the same skill? Well, Stefan Potter has a few things going for her. First things first, she is a lot more survivable, partially from her stats, but also because she is a USS faction, which gives her access to the Manju, which is very important because air raid assistance requires her to stay alive or any of the ships. And basically all the ships that have that assistance skill are very, very squishy destroyers. Ariake gives up all of her ability to be survivable in order to do a little extra damage. That's not really what she's there for. And Ardent gives a lot of debuffs that help your carriers survive, but most of the time with the hidden carrier mechanic, your carriers are doing fine surviving. It's actually your Vanguard, specifically Ardent herself, that's having problems surviving. Now, of course, I almost wanted to bring in Ardent in here because of her fun, magical, broken skin that one time. However, I think Stephen Potter is across the board pretty much better because there is a skill that she has, Whimsical Protector, that is also really good. On top of the fact that she can equip a Manju and has a little bit more survivable stats, she has the ability to increase her anti-air and evasion stat for the first 60 seconds, which most battles don't last much longer than that. And then while you have a full Vanguard, which is very easy to achieve, and she put her in the middle, then you're going to decrease the damage by 10% of the frontline ship, and then increase the damage of your backline ship that it deals by 10%. That's great. That's like perfect. Your off flag ship is a great place to put some DPS in. Your front ship is great to put the tanking skills in. She is, squishier than you'd like, so you put her in the middle, and that's perfect. Like, that is ideal. There's no better than that. And, you could maybe look at some of the other skills like Art. It's like the ideal is basically Potter, and you just get Potter for free. Now, like I said, it wears off after like 50 seconds or 60 seconds. But yeah, that's such a good skill, and she's much more survivable. So if you're going to run it, do that, especially if you need synergy with the USS faction. And I unironically run Potter all the time just by herself. Obviously, Kazugumo pairs with Shinano, so I run Kazugumo a little bit more because I'm using Shinano a lot. But basically, when you're not running the Shinano pair, Stephen Potter is just as good as Kazugumo, and certainly a very good ship. And she is obviously in her niche, but that's where elite ships are going to shine. They're going to shine in their niches. All right, let's go to number 2, who once again has a niche. Number 2 is HMS Aurora. I kind of had to do a double take on this ship because I was like, this ship has not been touched at all since the beginning of the game. Like, this is one of the OG ships that we had, and like the OG light build construction, and she has no augment module. She has no retrofit. Like, this ship, I feel like, is prime for it. I feel like she has a big fan base. I feel like I've seen a lot of fan arts and things like that, and I'm just like kind of shocked that they just, I don't know, forgot about this ship. Ironically, she's actually pretty good, not in stats wise, but if she ever got a retrofit or got upgraded or was on a bigger body, that would make her so much better because she's got 2 really solid skills. The first one is she gets to deal extra damage to destroyers, torpedo boats, suicide boats, transport vessels. So that allows her to really focus in, especially on like bosses that are destroyers, but it also allows her to mob pretty well, or at least better. Her stats are not very good, but she does have that extra damage that's helpful. And then more importantly, her other skill, while she's alive, she just has to be alive, doesn't have to be doing anything. She decreases the evasion rate of destroyers and light cruisers by 20%. That's evasion rate. It's a debuff. And man, destroyers really, really want their evasion. So that's amazing if you're in really hard destroyer boss fights. Like, she kind of must be a must. If you have a lot of things missing, like there's certain challenge modes where you're just like, I really need to stop this destroyer from dodging all of my bullets. And Aurora just fixes that. There was a time when people were running triple destroyer fleets in PvP, and people would just bring in Aurora and be like, goodbye, yeet. So she's niche. Obviously, you want to have a destroyer. You want to go fight destroyers, but and she light cruisers are good enough too. But yeah, when you're fighting destroyers, she's really powerful, and that niche is very interesting. She's certainly she's still used these days as an elite with literally no changes from her release. All right, guys, there's only one ship left. If you know me well enough, you know which ship this is gonna be. This is probably one of the most used ships in the game. I don't know if it counts as my most used ship anymore, but it certainly is the ship that has died the most under my watch. Yes, she died for our sins. She's number 1 on this list. It is Juno. She got her retrofit, and that makes her an elite now. And man, this ship is great. I mean, I know we're going to talk about the martyr skill. Like, that's the skill that we have to talk about, because 25% heal to your whole fleet is amazing, especially in PvP. And I know you're going to be arguing about PvP, bias, but it's actually just really good all the way around, because it just helps you clear really hard content. And it, like I said, it's just kind of busted in PvP. And she got a retrofit that made it even better because it makes her like go invincible, at least in PvP. It allows her to have a heal when she takes damage to everybody in your Vanguard fleet. Honestly, though, she's not a bad ship by herself, especially considering that she started off as a rare. She's actually got 500 anti-air paired with an anti-air mode and like 175 anti-air gun efficiency. Like, she can shoot down some planes, and she's like, you know, mobile enough. Like, she's not a bad ship by any means, to the point where you can bring her in a bunch of content and she can like fix your anti-air problem while at the same time like kind of giving you the flex to do extra damage. And like, I have no problem bringing her around. She actually gets a main gun +1 post retrofit too, so like she can deal damage. Like, what? I mean, like I said, it's not going to be anything to write home about, but like a ship that has a main gun +1 that goes invincible, that heals your whole ship, like, yeah, she would be, I mean, she ever got to an SR, she would be busted. She's already pretty busted. I see her all the time still. She's one of the OG ships, and she's like still used so frequently. She's such a good ship, and yeah, I think she has to be the top of the elite tier list. I'm sorry. You guys should have seen this coming. Anyway, that is our top 10 list. We have Queen Elizabeth 10, Leipzig 9, Birmingham 8, Portland 7, Naganami 6, Kagaru 5, Isuzu 4, Stephen Potter 3, Aurora 2, and Juno 1. So anyway, if you guys don't agree, let me know why. Let me know your list, and I hope you guys enjoyed this fun little side video. I don't know, people were always being like, hey, you always kind of brush off these elites as not being as good, or, you know, needing more stats, and so I wanted to have a video focused on, you know, how the elites are when you stack them against each other, kind of compare apples to apples, and there's still some elite ships that get some usage, and I think there's a good chunk of these ships on here that if they get a retrofit, and like they weren't a rare being retrofitted into an elite, but they're an elite that hasn't got a retrofit yet, I think there's a chance that they can like upgrade a little bit. It reminds me a lot of like Unicorn and Jinsu. Those are obviously not on this list because they have their SR retrofits, but they would have been on this list had they not had those retrofits, and then they got those retrofits, and now they're like, you know, top tier ships again. I guess Jinsu not as much, but like Jinsu's still pretty solid. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to the members that make this video as well as channel possible. Shout out to you guys. Take care. I'll see you guys next time.